Hello, Reverend Katie Zay, wonderful CEO of RCRC. I'm so glad to be with you today. Reverend Carrie Jackson, what is my title? Director of Spiritual Care and Activism. There's so much going on in the world. My mom used to say, as long as I know my name, and I think I do that. I'm so honored to be with you today. We've got some great questions that I want to pose to you as we're talking about compassion for surviving and thriving. This is week 10 of Compassion School. And so first, I want to thank all of you who have been part of Compassion School at any point over these 10 weeks. And we trust and pray that this has been valuable food for you. And I say food because we need to be nourished and replenished in order for us to survive and for us to thrive. And we think compassion is a big part of that. Reverend Katie, anything you want to say to our fellow sojourners in Compassion School before we start the questions?
Oh, I have nothing. This community that's formed around this virtual school, and Carrie, for your visionary leadership and bringing it together and for including me. It's been really fun. And I've learned a lot in this process of trying a new thing for RCRC, and certainly not the end of our discussions of compassion, but this has been a really fun and timely journey to be going on this fall. So I'm kind of sad it's almost over, but I'm also really grateful.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's hop into our questions. One of my favorite thinkers, spiritual leaders, authors, Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, says that while we often look to guns, bombs, and money to help us feel safe and strong, it is really compassion that is the measure of our strength. When you hear those words, what does that mean to you, especially in this time of multiple concurrent national and global crises that are leaving many of us feeling overwhelmed, sad, weak, and scared?
I think at a gut and heart level, it just feels so true, just in a feeling way of like, yes, that's absolutely true. And so then I have to spend some time thinking about why that feels so true to me. And when I think about different means of violence and having power over others, is that it's completely rooted in fear and reactivity. And compassion is true strength because it asks of us that we're not immediately reacting to every situation, every experience we have that brings up that fear. That's a natural emotion. For me, one of the most helpful Buddhist teachings that I've learned from is the idea of the second arrow, which I'm sure you know and others know, that the situation that causes pain is the first arrow. And so often we react with the second arrow that causes additional wounding. And that we can actually pause, as we've been talking a lot about, and stop ourselves from that second arrow if we learn to just breathe before we react. Yes. Or we respond to something that activates that adrenaline or triggers some experience that we've had that makes us react so strongly to a current situation. So compassion is very quiet and steady strength. And it also preserves our own humanity as we find ways to respond to difficult situations or to difficult people in ways that are thoughtful and rooted in justice and in love for each other. So it's about preserving our own humanity in the way that we respond, in which violence and power over does not.
Another of my favorite thinkers and spiritual leaders, authors, was Martin Luther King Jr., who talked about his definition of power, because you were talking about power over it. social theorist Paul Wartenberg talks about power over and power to, and just really exciting things. So any of you want to explore more about social theory and power, please check Wartenberg. But Dr. King talked about power as power is how we accomplish things. And he said, power at its best is love responding to the demands of justice. But King also says this about power, that power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic.
Yes, that is so good.
And so when we talk about compassion and love, and Dalai Lama tells us that compassion and love are necessities for our survival, not luxuries, but necessities. What do you think about that as people talk about, national security strength and securing the border and then people's individual behavior in the election season, 2020 election season? We have seen people, as you were talking about, this reactionary mode that so many have been in. And so in some places, people have been showing up saying, don't keep voting. And in other places, keep voting. And there's no consistent through line about what a democratic process ought to look like when there is that reactivity. And so how do we help use compassion, or how can compassion be a valuable tool to help move people out of reactivity and into more thoughtful understandings of strength, more thoughtful understandings of national security, more thoughtful understandings of what it means to be the democratic republic that we have held ourselves out to be for these 200 years? Does compassion really have anything to do?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in there. Let's see what good trouble we can get in trying to answer all those questions.
Good trouble, yes.
Yeah, so my first thought when you were asking about national security in particular is that there really is no security. I mean, security is not something that we can create or hang on to. There's so much uncertainty, in our own individual lives. We do, at least for me, I do all kinds of things to try to have security in my life. But at any point, something could dramatically shift that I have zero control over. So to me, the idea of security and the way that we talk about it is very much a fear and control based value. And I think about the responses to 9/11 and the way that we travel, they're all so reactionary. They're not about prevention. They're about responding to, the ways that violence has happened. And so it feels very like fear and control based, but it doesn't actually create security. It gives us the illusion or the feeling, maybe the false feeling of security. And yet at the same time, those very structures make many people in the airport feel very insecure, especially people whose bodies are already marginalized. So yes. I think just like that we make national security in that way such a focal point drives the way that we spend our money. You look at our military budget compared to everybody else in the world, all of our resources are put in, many of our resources, I should say, are put into the illusion of security. So I think compassion helps us address the fear that's driving this obsession with the idea of security, for one.
Yes.
And I think collectively, like we've been talking about, so many of us are caught up in these cycles of reactivity. We're lashing out, we're canceling each other. We are reinforcing the very systems and ideologies that we say we want to change and that we want to dismantle. And I will tell you, I have a real problem with people attacking our current president for his body. Like, for
Yes.
me, that,
Yes.
and I know others find, some pleasure in that, but really that just reinforces the marginalization of bodies in this country and in this
Mm.
world. And I think all of us have to be really careful about the ways that we're responding, that we can be just compassionate, loving, having that kind of power that you were describing, without resorting to upholding the structures that we want to change.
Mhm.
So just as one example, and I mean, I'm not perfect at this. I'm human, and I have felt many times over the last few months just the rage build up and that desire to lash out. Like, anger is such a powerful emotion,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like, there's a chemical reaction that's happening physically when we feel anger, and there is that desire to expend the energy. And I think without compassion, that energy can be used to create more division or to lash out or to uphold all the systems that I say I want to change. So I think it's not judging ourselves for having the emotion, the fear, the anger, whatever, but really saying, okay, what is this about? And then how do I want to use it? And can I channel this for good? Can I channel this to create the world that I want to see, to become the kind of society that I want to live in, as you
Yeah.
often say? Um,
I really appreciate all of what you're saying. And I'm reminded of a woman who's a member of a church I was pastor of many years ago. And there were a lot of dynamics happening in that church. Some of the story, as I was the first woman to be pastor, the first person of color to be pastor, and the first openly gay person to be pastor. So there were a lot of dynamics and people pushing back against me, for various reasons that really centered around their own fear, and how I then symbolized something that was really about their fear. And then when we use people as symbols of what our fears are, we dehumanize them. And so even as you were talking about the body image attacks that there have been against the president, while in a moment it might help you feel good,
yes.
in the long term, it impedes us from having the society that we say we want. So anyway, this woman who is a member of my church used to respond with such intense anger to things. And I asked her about that one time, and she said, that's when I feel most alive.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so compassion invites us, I think, how to a way of feeling alive. I mean, fully alive while not hurting someone else.
Yes. Yeah. And really reconnecting with our bodies. When you were saying that's when she feels alive, many of us have numbed ourselves to
Mm,
what our feelings actually feel like in our bodies.
yeah, yeah,
And if anger can become an addiction,
yes.
for the reasons that you said, that it gives us that little boost temporarily, and then it goes away, and then we feel remorse or whatever, and then we need that boost again. And finding a way to feel strength and power that doesn't feel like that bubbling up hot energy, that it can actually feel like a calm steadiness, and that can be just as powerful, if not more so.
And so, in light of all of the stuff that's happening in the country, I want to share this this quote from Anne Lamott first before I go into that. Anne
Always.
Lamott says, to be engrossed by something outside ourselves is a powerful antidote to the rational mind, which frequently has its head up its own ass.
That sounds just like Anne Lamott.
So, so many of us wanting to get the rush of strength or the rush of power over someone, wanting to rush away from the fears and the sense of inadequacy or overwhelm that we might feel. And you're talking about at times how there can be an addictive nature or an addictive aspect to how we respond to fear. And when it's addictive, then how the level at which we responded last time is not enough. We want more to get the rush.
Right.
And so here it is, compassion. How can we help spread compassion throughout our networks as an antidote to people having their heads up their ass? And I hope people are not offended by Reverend saying that to Reverend. But a lot of us, we have our heads up our ass. And it can be true regardless of one's politics. Because then we can start thinking, well, they're wrong and I'm right. And that tribe, that group, but me and my posse, we got it right. And therefore we can put the others down. So how can we use compassion as an antidote to people living in such ways that they have their heads up their ass?
I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but compassion is an inside job and an outside job. It is both. There is a lot of interior work that has to happen of giving ourselves compassion that we all deserve as human beings, and maybe we never got before. I know for me that the inner critic, I guess the ego voice, can be quite loud and indignant. And I know that it serves that function for self-preservation, but it's not always helpful in living in community with each other. So
yes,
really starting with that internal work of giving ourselves the compassion, like, I'm human, these thoughts are going to come up, but I get to decide how I'm going to respond. So I think as we do that work, we start to be able to respond more compassionately to people in our lives, because we realize everybody's got a version of that they're dealing with. Everybody's got that ego voice that's telling them that they need to defend or preserve or control. So I really think that it has to be both.
So I'm hearing you
time and exploring, why am I deserving of compassion? And if I don't feel like I am, well, who told me that I'm not? Where did those messages come from?
Yeah.
And then I think from there, we start to model for other people what compassion looks like. We can model self-compassion to people. We can talk about the ways that we're showing ourselves love and understanding. And I just think from there, there's the rippling effects that happens. And then when something happens where there's a less than compassionate response, it's a great opportunity to show yourself more compassion, but also to step back and think about what happened. What was I responding to, and how could it be different in the future? And as we were talking, I think before we started recording, just that it's incremental. It's going to be a slow, gradual change and shift in the way that we're operating and the way that we're responding to other people, because it's so different from many of the values that a lot of us were taught, or at least observed from living in this society. So, just expect the change to be steady and gradual, and maybe not as fast as you were hoping, but hopefully in a more long-lasting way.
So it is the case that in this society, and I often think about trees, there's some trees that sprout up really quickly, but then when winds and various weather conditions come, they don't have the depth of roots to sustain them. I love the root system of the redwoods that are huge trees can sustain all kinds of conditions, but part of their strength is the root system, that their rooting intertwines with the roots of other redwoods. And that's the kind of society I want us to be, and to honor and value the contributions of each one, even though it might be a little different. And, lest anyone think I am suggesting everybody needs to be one kind of tree. I am not suggesting that. But there is incredible value in being in society. And those who are married can appreciate that you get to learn a lot about yourself while being in relationship with this other person. Do you like everything that they do? Of course not, nor do they like everything that you do. But there's some incredible opportunity to learn some more things about yourself. So we're in a society, Reverend Katie, where most people are socialized not to be in touch with their feelings, not to be in touch with their bodies, as you were talking about that earlier. How can compassion being extended to people who are not in touch with their own feelings become a valuable resource for helping to build more toward the kind of society we have the capacity for?
Yeah, that's really, really good. How do we have compassion for people who are on a different part of their journey, or maybe haven't even started it? I mean, I think that when I think of that question, I think about how much I've grown even in the last year in these areas, and how a year ago I wouldn't recognize myself now in certain ways. And remembering that we're all on a journey. I guess that gets overused, but I just think none of this is inherent. It's not necessarily encouraged. And so it takes a lot of work. And so for me, when I think about the things that I'm aware of now that I wasn't before, where I try to go is, gratitude. I'm so thankful that I see that now. I'm so thankful that I'm developing the resources and the tools, that I have people in my life who model these things for me. And had they not been patient with me or being willing to meet me where I was, I wouldn't be here now. And so I think I'm not perfect at this. I'm a super judgmental person, and I get very impatient with people. But when I think about who were the people along the journey for me, or the things that I've read or the things I've experienced that have helped me get there, I just feel a lot of gratitude. And knowing that it's not my job to get everybody to the same place as I am, but that maybe with compassion, I can be one of the people along the way who helps them get to that next step, that helps with their gradual transformation. Not easy to do. I think for me, it's easy to forget where I was. And I think about it similarly to watching my daughter grow up. It's hard for me to remember when she didn't know how to ride a bike, or she didn't know what her letters were, or she didn't know how to say certain things. As soon as she's gained the skill, I go, oh, well, yeah, that's who she's always been. So there is something about learning and growing that it can be hard to go back and be compassionate to our younger selves. And one of the practices that I have taken up, because I'm a journaler, I've journaled since I was a little kid. I have this picture of myself when I was 10 that I put in my journal, and I put on the page that I'm going to write in the next day, and just remembering that little girl as I'm writing and having compassion for her. Yes. And just where she was and what she wasn't getting at that time, and now how I can nurture. You talk a lot about we're all the ages we've ever been, which I love that, and like nurturing that 10-year-old who's still there.
So we have an opportunity to extend love and compassion. And again, those are not just feelings. Compassion is, I might call it empathy in action. It's not just empathy in feeling, but in action. And if there is one hope you have for the difference Compassion School might make in the lives of individuals who have been journeying with us and in their own personal lives and in the society? What hope or hopes do you have?
Yeah, well, similar to what you shared, just that reminder that compassion is not based on our emotions. It's something that we decide we want to be. And so, no matter what kind of an emotional person you are, you can be more compassionate each and every day because it's a decision that we make. And I hope that we all remember how powerful compassion is, that it's not weakness, that it's our greatest strength. No matter where we are on the journey, we can continue to grow and learn. And that my biggest hope is that this value of compassion be at the center of how each of us lives our lives and pursues justice in the world. Which might seem like a very big idea, but I think as people of faith, we're called to imagine that which we have not seen and to believe that it's already being created.
Mm, mm. Call to imagine that which we have not seen. And I want to echo something you said during our class on self-compassion, that when we extend compassion to ourselves, it creates greater opportunity for us to connect with creativity and innovation. And so the more we become able to see a grander society, and we become more able to live into it and to create the kinds of systems and structures that would support that grander society. This is up to us. We can do this. We are positioned more now than we've ever been as a society to really be what Martin Luther King Jr. talked about as a great nation, a compassionate nation. We're more positioned than we've ever been to be a justice-focused nation, not giving justice out in dribs and drabs to people like little crumbs and saying, okay, y'all be satisfied with that and go away and be quiet. But really looking at from a very intersectional way, what are the ways that we must be more focused on valuing all people across their body type, across their color, their race, their language, their sexual orientation, gender identity, national, what's the word I want? National, huh?
Nationality?
Nationality, thank you. Their mental, physical ability, on and on and on, but valuing all people. And guess what? The beauty that comes with that is that it also strengthens for us the capacity to value ourselves.
Yes.
Each of us is more valuable than what we've been taught.
Mm-hmm.
And so is the person you like and the one you don't like. May this be a truth by which we live our lives and shape the society that we say we want to be. Thank you so much for journeying with us in Compassion School, and keep a listen for some other absolutely wonderful learning opportunities that RCRC will be bringing your way very, very soon. Love and blessings to you.
Thank you.
Reverend Katie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie. This has been such an honor.